Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. Hope you're having a phenomenal day. Boy, we got some exciting stuff here. Some really cool patterns we're going to double check. Some very unfortunate pullbacks, but also expected liquidation hunts here for these lower ranges. So we're going to discuss that and do a quick comparison on some of these coins here. Try to find the outliers, which coins are looking better to potentially take longs or shorts with, and obviously discuss the last 24 hours of liquidation and the overall crypto market overview. So be sure to stick around. We got a good one today. Let's take a look. All right, folks, before we get started with some back-end liquidation data and just kind of understanding specifically where the outliers are here, there's some important stuff I wanted to touch on here. Once more to reiterate, there is an FOMC press conference and Fed interest rate meeting here tomorrow. Those dates are posted in my Discord here. If you go to my news section, we always have this information available for you, and Mr. Anderson's very good. He's one of our admins over there about providing you with very relevant information. So thanks again so much, Mr. Anderson, for that. And of course, also quickly to note, too, when it comes to the polls and what your thoughts are on crypto Twitter, 44% of you think we're going to hold this range of 114 to 115, which is essentially the case right now. However, crypto YouTube voted 152 votes yesterday. 45% of you think we're going to see 117K before we see 113, or just that's the next stop for Bitcoin. So very interesting stuff to hear that. Let's quickly look at the liquidation data here, and I'll share some really good news with you too here. Quickly to note, Ethereum. This coin got dumped on pretty hard. It's a 4-to-1 ratio for longs versus shorts getting liquidated. So that's not great, but it's kind of expected too. That 44.50 range was hit, and at this point here, it bounced off that level effectively. Well, there's a lot of confluence there. We'll talk about that here soon. You can see the most amount of liquidations, however, with others. Basically, this is just kind of summarizing other altcoins outside of Bitcoin and Ethereum. We saw roughly a 5-to-1 ratio there for longs versus shorts. But the interesting thing here is if we look at Bitcoin itself, we have just as many longs as shorts getting liquidated. So that tells us that Bitcoin is kind of stuck in its range, of course, and that other altcoins are getting this knee-jerk reaction down, but they're also recovering quite quickly, because if you look at our alt season index here, we can see we're still maintaining that $1.7 trillion market cap. So those are also very good signs here. We want to kind of identify and understand that even though altcoins are pulling back quite hard with Bitcoin, they're also responding quite well too, at least specific ones. Obviously, you want to kind of invest in the right ones. Obviously, it's difficult to identify sometimes, but ideally, we're going to be looking at the comparative analysis between the coins here and make sure we understand the correlation between the coin that we're looking at and how it's performing versus Bitcoin. There are some specific outliers that we want to pay attention to, just so we understand kind of what they're looking like. Anyways, that's kind of just something to look at there. We'll identify that here shortly. I want to bring something else to your attention, not just the news and the fundamentals coming up here, but also the free premium option here as well through my Discord. So jumping over to Discord, if you want to verify your Bitunix account, just deposit, trade, and essentially register with my link, you'll be able to get a free month of premium. All the instructions are available on my Discord there. So check that out. They have a phenomenal option right now with a $10,000 USDT airdrop and also 16K in individual rewards. So these are awesome. You can track all your stats. Use the links down below for that. Okay, so be sure to check that out. I just get a lot of questions on that. Figure I'd just kind of open up with that. So let's go ahead and talk about the backend data here for Bitcoin. Let's start with the average top trader. So we can see top trader long positions are dissipating, and we're starting to see more shorts opening up. So as we get closer to that 115, the 114K range, there's more shorts being opened, and we can see the amount of leverage is increasing too. So that tells us there's more security in a sense from the average top trader to basically take more shorts than longs, okay? And if we look here as well, this is very minimal, but you can kind of see if we zoom in really close here, once again, this is a 4-hour time frame. This tells us the large positions, these are 1 million plus positions, are starting to increase. That does typically reflect reaching a tentative bottom, okay? So because once again, more confidence at those lower levels. Now, all this stuff is very speculative, of course, but the key takeaway is that, when you understand the psychology of larger volume traders, it's important to kind of understand what their trends are looking like. That's why we like to look at that too, just to kind of identify, maybe where their minds are at. As far as open interest is concerned, this is once again more so support ranges below the price, 113K, 111K, and 114. So those are the 3 areas of support if we continue lower for Bitcoin. Just keep in mind, based on how altcoins are responding right now, there's a distinct probability that if Bitcoin goes down to 113K, we'll see a good 5, 10, maybe even 15% correction from a lot of altcoins. Just that we saw in the last 24 hours what a small correction from Bitcoin will do right now. So just be mindful of that. either have a tight stop loss or make sure that you're using low leverage so you can survive these kind of ebbs and flows. All that said, liquidation long delta is at about 1.5 billion. That is super low for Bitcoin. We generally don't see that that narrative, if you will. It's lately we've been experiencing 10, 20, 30 billion in either direction. So at this point, a low number there leads me to believe that we are right on the edge of either greatness, we either pivot and bounce from here, or it's a disastrous and we go down a lot further. And I think when I say a lot further, I'm mostly referring to this lower liquidation range of 113,000. So 113 to 114K is still a desirable entry consideration for me for a long. I think it's still kind of high risk to try to short to that level. That's just generally the concept there. Okay, so I'm trying to limit the amount of shorts, even though there's plenty of opportunities that pass us by. We did thankfully take some nice profits on our Crow coin short. We hit all targets at roughly 59%, and you could round up and say that was 3 days ago. Because once again, you can identify some coins that are just totally like falling off of the edge of a cliff. That coin was doing that. We got in at about 25 cents, went all the way down as low as 22, I think, for our take profit. Either way, I covered that a few days ago. You'll know that if you saw it. But other than that, what I want to identify here is the kind of the daily time frame for Bitcoin, just kind of recognize roughly where we're at. So to touch on this here, we had an overextension leading into this range. We still have yet to close above 116,000. We've had multiple attempts to do that. We've seen 1, 2, 3, 4 days now in a row where the price has been unable to cross that level. So that's just an important thing to kind of be mindful of, because once more, 116 is that daily resistance range for us. So as long as we're under 116, we can presume the price of either altcoins or Bitcoin will go down. Now, obviously, altcoins will continue to go up as the price of Bitcoin goes up too. There's that as well. But for the most part, you could realistically say that it's safer to short under 116,000 until Bitcoin can cross that threshold versus trying to take longs just based on how fast they're moving down. They're moving 2 to 3x of Bitcoin on the way down. And in most cases, minus specific outliers, they're only moving up 1 to 1.5x on the upside. Right. So once more, that pairing is important to understand. When we look here, we can see we're still over 50 on the RSI. Well, that's all well and good. Money flow index is tapering off, stochastic swinging down. We're over all moving averages. Also a very positive sign. 114K is roughly that lower support for that. So the truth is we have still slightly more favorable signs of the price going higher than lower in the overall sense. But to me personally, I feel like we're still going to see the 114 to 113K range. And if so, that's definitely a heavy consideration for me for a long. Between now and then, I'm going to be patient and not trying to FOMO into a long or a short on Bitcoin, even though it certainly looks like it wants to break out here. We have a pretty strong bullish engulfing candle here in the 4-hour time frame. We're maintaining above all moving averages now. And we also can see, if we kind of zoom in here, that we're still over 50 on the RSI, never truly broke that level. So we're still maintaining above support, that roughly 114.5K range that had that fair value gap that is now filled. So these are all very positive signs. The 4-hour time frame also shows we have a MACD convergence. So I'm going to side with our crypto YouTube votes from yesterday. 117K definitely seems like a distinct probability at this point. Now, just be mindful, if we hit that level, we got to be able to close above 116K today to be able to maintain the uptrend, because that'll show that we've broken that threshold and that the bulls are remaining in control. That's what we're looking for. So what are things that you like to look for? Why don't you comment below, let me know. Thank you again so much for being an amazing part of my life too. Just want to kind of throw it out there. We got a lot of new subscribers here recently, so appreciate you always liking and commenting below. Let's go ahead and move on to the next series of altcoins. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below, or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on into the Ethereum chart here. And just before we do that, I want to kind of clarify the back-end liquidation data first, because it's important to recognize kind of this back-end sweep that we saw here. And we talked about it yesterday being a distinct probability, because once more, 4,500 is that higher time frame support level, or at least it was Still could be, honestly, at this point, because we truly haven't closed below that on the daily time frame. However, all that being said, we zoom in a little bit here. This last 7 days on the right for open interest, 4,500 is a little number there, but the biggest chunk is 4,440. That's where we have the most amount of open interest. Coincidentally, we look at the amount of liquidation there. There was probably somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 billion in liquidation there. Each one of these bars is about 2.5 billion. We can see that all the chunks there, basically anyone who had longs available that would be liquidated, did essentially get stopped out there at 44.40. Okay, so it's a perfect little liquidation sweep. It's exactly how the market makers do it. They hit those areas of liquidation and then they pump the price right back up. Keep in mind the price of Ethereum isn't necessarily pumping. It's not even, it hasn't truly bottomed out yet. So I want to be very clear here that you shouldn't be bullish on this coin because we swept that liquidation. Don't expect the price just to go straight up from here. We're going to require Bitcoin to go higher. And honestly, at this point, compared to all the other altcoins we're going to be looking at today, Ethereum is significantly underperforming here. And honestly, it's not one of the greatest considerations for along at this exact location. Once more, though, there's a lot of things that can happen, but we're still in a descending trend. Just want to be clear about that. And the last 24 to 48 hours, this coin is significantly underwhelming versus Bitcoin. Okay, and we can kind of compare it here really quick if you want to see. The left-hand side is Bitcoin's price action, is the hourly chart, and the right-hand side is Ethereum's price action. So you can see how poorly the price action is performing here in this lower range where Bitcoin is still establishing higher lows and ETH is making lower lows, right? Now, this could very well be a descending, wedge type of pattern that can, in fact, break to the upside. But once more, underwhelming there, to say the least. So that's kind of where Ethereum's out there comparatively. And if we do take a look here at the overall sentiment with the daily time frame, once more, we're still descending. We had an overextension leading into this pullback. We are above 50 in the RSI, but MACD is starting to diverge. Stochastic still pulling back. And even though we're above all moving averages and generally construed as overall bullish, the propensity for further downside is still higher on this coin. Now, I don't recommend necessarily shorting at this level. I think we have a lot of support in this range. And if we look at the 4-hour time frame, we are starting to see a bit of an overextension. And we also want to recognize that we are maintaining below 50 in the RSI. So these are not like a lot of great signs. We do have some confluence here, though. Once again, the 200-day SMA and that 0.618 fib level, as well as that being a local high here. So I'm still leaning more towards that open interest range of 44.40 being a good support for us, and that is a likely tentative bottom. But we want to presume the price is going to continue lower overall, just because it's probably safer to think that based on this being the overall trend, right? The trend is your friend until Ethereum establishes a different shift and essentially establishes higher highs and higher lows, especially compared to Bitcoin. We want to presume that it's going to continue lower. So this is not a fantastic situation from Ethereum by any stretch. All right, so that's kind of where we're at there. What are your thoughts? Why don't you let us know? Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. Let's move on to Solana here next. Kind of see this is still a pretty big beast here. Basically filled majority of its fair value gap, honoring its ascending trend here based on the 50-day SMA. The 20-day SMA is kind of shifting gears here for us. Let's take a look at the back end and kind of see where we got some support. Now, I mentioned in my community yesterday, and I'd be fine to, sit on my hands here for a little bit. But the truth is I'm going to be waiting until we see the mid to low 220s. Main reason why is because there's a lot of open interest support in that range. This is the macro on the right-hand side, but we can see 210 to 220 is that heavy amount of support. And a lot of times open interest can work like a magnet in a lot of ways. It's very similar to liquidation levels. And the concept there is that with heavy liquidation in specific ranges, you have more propensity to see the price action get hit there. Now that we've shifted gears here and we're starting to see our liquidation short delta is almost at break even. In fact, it just popped up a little bit to 1 billion. But the concept here is that we are starting to see that potential shift in momentum for Solana, and it's also a pretty well overextended coin too. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a correction from Bitcoin, that Solana has a little knee-jerk reaction to this 210 to 220 range based on liquidation. There's also a super big chunk at 230. You really think market makers are going to just let that go? No, probably not. There's billions of dollars there. If they swipe that level really quick, they can just pump the price right back up and take more profit. It's disgusting, honestly, but it's very much par for the course. course. So I used to lose sleep over it. Now I just kind of laugh. Anyways, daily time frame, we are pretty well overextended on this coin. There's some fair value gaps below the price. Based on fib levels too, we could very well come down as low as, once again, the 220, which is our 0.618 fib level. That's also our local high range too, if you look at the 216 to 220 range. So those are just little areas of interest to me. More so importantly, just it's probably a stretch to consider along that range, because Solana looks like it definitely wants to pump here. But those would be excellent areas of consideration. So you don't necessarily have to be like me and wait for an opportunity that doesn't happen. I'm perfectly fine by it, mainly because I look at a lot of different coins throughout the day. So a missed opportunity to me is not a big deal. But try not to FOMO into either at this point. This market is really good about that. But once more, tomorrow's FOMC, right? So we could very well be seeing the sell-off before that happens. Between now and then, I would be careful trying to take a late short. But also, if you're going to be taken along, just recognize we're still in somewhat of a descending type of short-term trend, right? Until that short-term trend changes, we want to presume it's going to continue. But looking at the 4-hour time frame, we have reclaimed 50 on the RSI. Money flow index is increasing, or sorry, it's still low, but stochastic swinging up and MACD converging, or at least on its way to a convergence. So all these things kind of combined gives us a slightly more favorable consideration for a long. Just bear in mind, we are still pulling back, and even though it's looking all nice and good here to see the price moving higher, it could very well be a trap to pull the price action lower. So just honestly, when coins are this overextended and you have these continuation potentials, oftentimes I like to wait on the sidelines and wait to see what happens first, because this is just too high of a risk to take either a long or a short based on a lot of conflicting factors. So once more, those are just my thoughts. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just probably the safer, more conservative approach. Not everyone likes to trade that way, and that's okay. But the concept here is that Solana is still very bullish in the overall sense. So if you're going to short carefully, and if you're going to take it long, make sure you take some profits in the quite quickly, I would say, because there's no guarantees we're going to be able to hold this range here for Bitcoin. We need to close above 116, I think, to have some real gusto, if you will. All right, let's look at SUI next here. Take a look at SUI. This is the last 7 days of open interest. And as per usual, that 353 range, we talked about that yesterday being a potential bottom for us. We see a lot of support in that range. The price bounced off that level. So I don't necessarily think the price just recovered instantly because of open interest, but it is interesting how open interest does tend to kind of give us indications of support and resistance zones. So once more, 350 is a rough estimate there for that local bottom. Now I want to talk really quick about liquidation short delta. It's still high. So this is concerning to me, seeing these kind of pumps from SUI and liquidation delta being so high. So it tells us that we're still in a descending trend, and we need to be mindful that this could very well continue lower. We see here 330 to 345 is that local area of liquidation. There's a decent chance we still see that level hit. Now, it was an area I was talking about yesterday, that 320 to 330 consideration for a long if we see that. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet, or may never happen at all, but the concept here remains the same. A lot of that liquidation got hit at 345, price recovered, but there's still a lot left there, and that leads me to believe we're going to potentially progress lower. We can also see 363 is that local high, which leads me to believe we may actually see the price action pull back. This also could very well be somewhat of it's pretty ugly, but it is potential type of head and shoulders pattern, right? And obviously, it depends on how you draw it out. You could draw it out any which way you want. And I'm not trying to kind of convince you that we're in a descending trend because of that. Because once more, when you look at those kind of things, you want to see if there's any confirming factors. So let's actually look at that instead of speculating here. To clarify, on the daily time frame, the larger, if we look back, this is ever since June, we can see the most amount of support is at 345. So that level held pretty well. All right, so we can presume that 345 will continue to maintain as a support. We've also identified previously that 363 is that resistance. That was based on the macro open interest. And I don't think I have it pulled up here, but let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and check out the 30-day resistance or support ranges for SUI. And just to clarify, 360, there it is right there, 360 and 365. Those are heavy areas of open interest. So we're below that, therefore we can consider that to be somewhat of a resistance. Okay, so I'm just kind of bringing these areas to your attention. 345 is a good support, 363 is a likely resistance. We are right there at 50 on the RSI, mostly staying above, which is pretty good. Money flow index is quite high. That generally implies sustainability. And we can see both the momentous indicators are telling us we're going to continue lower. So a bit of a confliction, obviously. No chart's ever perfect, but we can see all moving averages are starting to kind of squeeze out between 350 and 360. So this coin is just kind of, it's preparing for a pretty big breakout or breakdown. That's the truth about it. We're kind of like right in this little range here where it could go either way. MACD is trying to converge, but we have barely reclaimed 50 in the RSI. Money flow index is bouncing, stochastic swinging up. There's a lot of things here kind of giving us some conflicting info. So me personally, when I see this, I usually like to stay on the sidelines. But if I'm going to lean towards anything here, I would say that 363, if we don't close above that, that may be an indication of further downside. That's kind of the concept there. So be careful, once more, taking a trade with this coin right now. It seems highly volatile. I know there's some speculative news too as well. If I'm not mistaken, somebody was talking about this in our Discord this morning. What was it? Yeah, there's like SUI networks partnering with Google to build payment protocols. So that could very well be the reason why it's recovering a lot quicker than other coins. So be mindful, that's a fundamental catalyst, and those are very tricky to trade. All right, let's go ahead and move on to XRP here and kind of see here. And I just want to clarify too, just because we have a head and shoulders pattern does not mean we're going to break down, okay? This is generally a bearish type of structure here, at least on the tail end. So when you see that, the price action propensity can be higher to go down. But we want to see if there's other confirming factors that may be conflicting with that before we take a trade in that direction, right? Because when we talked about this previously, XRP specifically, that $3 range, 303 exactly, is that heavy area of open interest and that point of control for the macro structure. So what that tells us, we have the most amount of volume at $3 is an easy round number to remember. So it really just tells us that that's either a support or resistance, depending on what side we're on. We've been maintaining a little bit of time above that level, so that could imply further upside. But liquidation short delta is now at 1 billion to the downside. Let's refresh and make sure it still is at 1 billion. So the concept here is that with the overall amount of people shorting versus taking longs is higher. We're right at a key level resistance until we close above that. And we also have 295 to 290 here is that local area of liquidation below the price. This leads me to believe that a continuation further down makes more sense, not just because we have a wonderful little head and shoulders pattern. So that means very little in the overall sense. There's a lot of back-end data here kind of reinforcing resistance in the current range and a propensity to wick down a little bit further. Now, this coin does have some bullish components, right? So if we take a look at the daily time frame, actually let's zoom out a little bit here. Ever since we've been on the range of just say 270 plus, we see once again the most amount of volume at 303. That's right where we're at presently. When we look at the RSIs, we can recognize we're over 50. That's generally a good sign. Money flow index is high too. That does imply we're likely to sustain this range. Now, whether or not the price goes up to 320 or down to 280, we're still going to be able to sustain this range based on that metric, right? And when we take a look at MACD, we can also recognize that it's still mostly converging but losing its momentum. So those are still slightly favorable signs on the larger time frame. We'll look at the 4-hour here is where things can get a little confusing for a lot of people, just based on the simple fact that we have moving averages kind of spread out within right where the price is at right now. You could argue those are resistances, but I just like to look at them as trend lines. And we understand this too as well. We can recognize we just barely reclaimed 50 on the RSI. That's very similar to SUI as well. So even though we have some good short-term continuation potentials here, and we see money flow index increasing, stochastic swinging up, and MACD converging, these are all pretty strong signs. Some of the stronger signs are still on the back end that have a lot more potential or propensity for the price to continue lower. And the only reason why I think that is because this coin is heavily manipulated based on market makers. Because we know if this coin were to move the way that the traditional consumer were to move, we'd probably be up in the, I don't know, some ridiculous number range, somewhere higher, right? But it's suppression, just like Bitcoin right now. We have all-time highs for traditional markets. And for some reason, Bitcoin is stuck on stupid, right? So it's an interesting thing, right? We got really good markets for traditional, and Bitcoin cannot seem to figure it out. So that to me is market suppression. So either way you look at it, XRP is heavily manipulated in that way. It's probably one of the highest, suppressed coins in my opinion, just based on how there's a lot of numbers there. Anyways, the whole concept here remains the same. It's a difficult consideration to trade this. I wouldn't trade a short based on this pattern. I would trade a short if you're considering one based on the back end data that to me tells me a little bit more than a potential indicator on the time frames, right? Because once more, those fundamentals or the foundational components are something to pay attention to. All right. So, anyways, make your own decision. Obviously, let me know what you decide. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why don't you comment below? And if you're a part of our community, welcome once more aboard. We had a lot of new subscribers coming over the weekend. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Enable alerts. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Have yourself a great rest of the day. Thanks again for your time. We'll see you soon.